This is Aska Tanveer with Cries of Kashmir. First World Congress on Enforced Disappearances began today in Geneva, Switzerland, with the keynote address by Nada Youssef A.L. Nashef, United Nations Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, and will continue until the 16th of January. The World Congress is co-organized by Convention Against Enforced Disappearances Initiative (CEDI), the United Nations Committee on Enforced Disappearances, the United Working Group on Enforced or Involuntary Disappearances, and the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. It has been more than 24 partners, including International Commission of Jurists, Amnesty International, Reporters Without Borders, FIDH, and many others. Owing to the new political reality, the United Nations addressed a problem when it recognized the growing trend of disappearances as being used as a method of punishment, as state actors' culpability for actions perpetrated on detainees became an issue. The number of potential detainees who simply disappeared increased. As these persons disappeared, the state could deny violating human rights because there was no evidence of their involvement because these individuals never reappeared alive. Realizing the state actors were using this new form of terror to bypass domestic and international law, the UN adopted the Declaration of Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances on the 18th of December 1992. Article 1 states that an act of enforced disappearances is an offense to human dignity. Article 2 states no state shall practice, permit, or otherwise tolerate enforced disappearances. According to the WCD, enforced disappearances remains widespread across the world, with devastating repercussions on entire societies. Following decades of mobilization to prevent and eliminate this heinous human rights violation, the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances was adopted in 2006 thanks to the tireless efforts of the states, associations of victims, human rights, and non-governmental organizations and experts. The United Nations has gone to great length to establish those human rights which is considered inalienable and inherent to all human beings. I believe in this regard we have shown the United Nations deep respect and concern for protecting human rights entirely. However, the practical application of United Nations efforts has suffered terribly. Violations of all of the above articles, principles, resolutions, conventions continue throughout the world unabated. Impunity remains the principal cause for the violation of human rights. The United Nations and other international forums and now First World Congress on Enforced Disappearances have witnessed intense discussion and negotiations on disappearances of individuals at different places in the world. Yet, the enforced disappearances of the thousands of Kashmiri civilian populations living under Indian occupation has received little, if any, attention. According to the United States State Department Country Report, the report issued by the United Nations High Commission on Human Rights and Srinagar-based Association of Parents of Disappeared Persons, over 8,000 people have disappeared in Kashmir since 1989. Despite the observations contained in a number of reports published by human rights organizations and governments, including the United States Department of the State, report of the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights, U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, Indian authorities continue to kidnap, detain, and torture Kashmiri civilians with impunity. While the laws such as the standard minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners, as well as the code of conduct for law enforcement officials and the body of principle for the protection of all persons under any form of detention or imprisonment, adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1979 and 1988 respectively, continue to remain on the statute books. The Indian Occupation Administration, under its specially devised laws and regulations such as the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act and the Public Safety Act, persist in massive violations of the basic rights of the people of Kashmir. Amnesty International calls PSA as lawless law. It is perhaps the iron curtain of secrecy and silence drawn by the India across the occupied territory that has prevented the systematic atrocities and continuous carnage being seen by the world. However, thanks to the efforts of some conscientious journalists and dedicated human rights workers are part of the truth, though not the amnesty in detail. About the carnage in Indian occupied Kashmir is out in the open by adding the insult to the injury. Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, said in Srinagar on the 13th of